Now, before we begin, there's some things that I would like to get out beforehand. I'll tell you a little bit about me first. I'm 15. I am a sophomore at Poway High. I am a Titan. I've written 4 books, starting in 7th grade, and just written progressively through the year. My first book, Bordering Shadow, should be out sometime 2013. When in 2013 now is unconfirmed. And as Mrs. Roy said, my books are novels. They are about 400 pages each. The first one is 465 pages long. And they are primarily science fiction and young adult stuff. So most of my presentation today is going to be geared towards science fiction, fantasy, and young adult. So you can still take stuff out of this if you're a historical writer, if you're nonfiction, but primarily this is geared towards fantasy and everything that you can create with your mind. And so my site, as Mrs. Roy said, is borderingshadow.wordpress.com. Visit it if you would like to. It has some great stuff there. And next. All right, before we begin though, I do have some disclaimers. These are all my opinions. So many of you will not agree to all of my opinions because we all have different styles of thinking. Another thing is not all of these strategies will work for all of you. I'm still in the process of learning. I've only been doing this for 3 years, even though I've done it more than a lot of people who have been doing it many years. And now, as I said, this is primarily geared for fantasy. My practices are subject to change since I am young, so when I get older, I'll probably be doing a lot more of expansion and stuff that I can't do right now because of time limitations. And another thing is, this doesn't cover everything. I can't cover everything that's in writing in an hour and 30 minutes. That is basically impossible. So what I do have here is an outline of creating a story. So first of all, if you guys have any questions or comments or anything about the slide, please raise your hand. I will answer them. But if you miss a question on slide, you can raise your hand at the very end and I'll address those questions as well. Also during this, you are free to take notes. Several times in this I will ask you to write some stuff and I would like it if you do. Without further ado, let's get started. So the first thing that comes to you when writing a story is that idea. It can happen anywhere, whether it's in front of a TV, while reading another book, or listening to music. And you get this idea and you keep on developing it and it becomes something more in your mind. Then you reach what I call the tipping point. Now the tipping point is the point where you decide whether, hey, I want to go into this story full out, or let's go back because nobody's going to like it. And the tipping point really should be, for at least your first idea, the point where you do go forward. Because everybody needs the starting point. And if you act instinctively on your first idea, it may not be that great, but it'll get you into that writing stage and that writing mind. But you don't have to be thinking like a writer to be a writer. Right now, a lot of you are thinking like readers. And you do think like readers when you first get that idea. You think, what would I like to see on the page? What would I like to do? You don't think about those clever little analogies or symbologies unless you have a higher level of mind. You think that, oh, it would be cool if this character did this as opposed to this in this other book I saw. Now, mistake number 1 is outlines. Now, outlines are essential to any writing piece. I made this mistake the first time I was writing. I just plunged headlong into the book and did not use an outline. And they're so vital because they really tell you where the story's going and everything, so that you don't have to revise and revise and revise. For example, my first book, I plunged headlong into it. I've spent 2 years revising it in addition to writing these other books. And I've had to rewrite the whole thing completely, and I wouldn't have had to do that if I do outlines. Of course, it is up to you if you want to use outlines or not, because for some of you, you have the time to write draft after draft after draft, and that may work for you. So, characters. The second thing after ideas that you think of most are the characters. And you get your inspiration from characters from anything. You can use a movie star, you can use your friends, you can use anything as inspiration for your characters. However, that does bring up legal issues. Some people don't want you to use their names or their persona for that character. And so what you do to get around that is you switch up names, you switch up identities and stuff. So even though you have this primary image of this one person being it, you can recreate them to become something else entirely. And that's where lots of characters do come from. Many authors do use real live people for that, and you can almost never tell the difference. Character boards are always good when you have a set of questions that you can always answer for a character. For example, these questions might not be necessary to the plot, but it could be stuff as simple as, what does your character eat for breakfast? Does your character have a bath or a shower at night? And those are good and fine, but normally I would wait. You can wait to do those until after you've written a lot about your character, because then you have an idea of how he actually would respond in those situations. Artistry is also good if you want to make a sketch of your character because you're artistically talented. That's great. It'll help you see in your mind what that character will look like. I'm not artistically talented, so I don't do that, but I know many people are artistically talented and literaturally talented. So, every story basically has the plot. The intro, which is the setup to the story, and you've got to make it count, because people, when they read the intro, have to be drawn into your story. It's got to be a hook. It's got to make people want to read more. The rise of the story is the bulk, and you've got to make that intriguing, because if it's not intriguing, then people put the book down. Probably the rise is very, very essential, especially because of some books I've read, like the Aragon series, where they've had the middle of the book very, very boring, unless you're into all that detail, and it doesn't have any suspense. It doesn't have much. Just this background of, oh, something's going to come eventually, but who cares? We have 600 pages more to go till then. And then you have conclusion, which is the end, and that's where you make your point. I'll talk more about all three of these in time. So now, what every good story has is essentially the perfect introduction, which is, like I explained, it's got to grab the reader. It's got to have a fantastic world, a world that really pulls you in as a reader, a world that you can see vividly. It can be a real world, it can be fantasy. It's got to have a relatable hero, somebody that you connect to. It's got to have a villain for the ages, or in some cases it doesn't, because some of the best books don't even have villains. They're like man versus nature or man versus himself. Suspense is always critical, but only when suspense is needed. Some books use suspense too much. I will go into that later as well. Another thing is it has to keep the reader guessing, but it can't keep them guessing too much. And the ending has to show the point and give the reader an aha moment. Now, as you can see from every good story, all stories walk a fine line, like a tightrope, between too much and too little. And it's finding that very center of balance in that tightrope when you can have the great story. Okay, so now I'm going to elaborate about the perfect introduction. So first you've got to establish several things. You've got to establish who is your audience, what is the tone of your story. You can give something that relates to your readers, and it's optional if you give some background to the story. For example, if you give something that relates to your readers, for example, if somebody had just got a car for the first time, just got his driver's license, you're going to hook in all the 16 and above readers because they know how it feels. And with that, then they think it's more of their style of story. But the thing about giving something that relates to readers is it's not going to relate to all readers. If you market to everybody, you're not going to market to anybody. That's a popular saying, and it's really true, because if you do that, then not everybody's going to be happy, because it's going to be a bland story full of mixes and everything that people want, but they don't want in so little amounts. And there's no possible way that you can give little amounts to big amounts in a large story with every single subject, topic, genre in the story. Now, giving some background is always good, because having having background and something for the reader to look forward to in the real story is great because it builds up the tension right from the start. Now, with some stories, it's great if you don't do it, if you just do something intriguing and mysterious that may come into play later in the story, but that doesn't necessarily come in at the very beginning of the story. For example, you can use a villain or a minor character talking about something else, and they'll give some background about the story, but you might not get that part of the story until 300 pages on into the book. Now, mistake number 2 about introductions is you have to watch out for size. My first introduction was 18 pages long, I believe, and it confused people because they thought that this introduction was being narrated by the hero, while it was in fact being narrated by the villain of the story. So they thought, oh, this hero is really dark. Did he just snap a couple necks? What? But, so you've also got to tell who is narrating. You can do like I did and keep going with that and make your reader know as soon as chapter 1 begins that that definitely was not the hero. Or you can actually put the hero or a minor character in there. And that's what a lot of movies do because they do not want to confuse people. Now, world building. This is the first thing that you should do in any story besides the introduction. The introduction can come into play if you want to get your idea out there and write. Because the first time you're writing, you're not going to want to outline the story and not know if you're capable of doing it or not. So introductions are vital to that to see if you have what it takes in your mind. But world building is essentially the first thing you do once you have practice with it. Now, this may take a while. World building will include everything from cultures of people in your town to what type of games they play, to what type of dialect they speak. You can even make your own language for that. To what type of transportation they have, how they view history, what are the two sides of history, the winning side or the losing side. There's so much that can go into world building, and the more in-depth that you see, the more in-depth that your readers see. Now, there are some strategies here. You can use maps for world building. Now, maps, you don't have to make them artistry. You don't have to be like the maps in Lord of the Rings. It can just be essentially little sketches. And maps are important because you can use them to say if a character is going from home to this building, then he's going to take a left here, and then when he goes home from that building, he takes a right. It just gets rid of those little plot insecurities. Another thing is do not be afraid. This does take a while. I've known an author who spends 4 months on world building before he even starts a story. And as a result, he gets everything. He makes up games for it, he makes up languages, he does all the cultures, everything. And guess what? Only 1% about shows up in the book. But that 1% is great because the readers know that there's a lot of thought put into this. And with a lot of thought put into this, you can see it more clearly. So now, research though, cultures, names, and geography. Those are the best things to do, even though research is sometimes boring. But research will always get you what you need. If your culture, for instance, is going to sacrifice somebody on an altar, you may want to give everybody in there some type of Aztec or names, because it's like their culture. Or for example, if your country believes in one almighty powerful being, you can give them Christian names. So what to expect from world building? Like I said before, expect the more thought that you put into it, the more good feedback will come out of that. Alright, so a hero. Now, a hero, the inspiration comes from you. It almost always does. In every single story I've known, the author will take a hero and make themselves the hero. They'll make themselves the better person that they never were. And so I would encourage all of you to do this as well. I mean, because it's the most natural. The more natural that you do, the more the reader sees your character as natural, because it makes them more relatable. But first things first, for heroes, you have to define what makes and breaks your hero. Your hero, it's no fun to have a hero that's invincible and everything, as Superman, technically, because then your character has no issues. It has nothing. Even if it's emotional issues and mental issues, that will make for a good character. You still want to have something that will physically hurt him, that can sometimes emotionally hurt him. And you want to figure out your perspective too. Will you be talking in the I format, or will you be talking in you, or for instance, Percy? And the key to that is you can do any of those things. You can do first, second, or third. But whenever you use I don't like it, because I means that the character will never die. You can't have suspense with an I character because you know that the character's not going to die in the end, because how is he going to write this piece in this format? I mean, it can work well. The Hunger Games was an example of that, how well it worked, and that built up suspense, but Katniss was never really in danger. It was just her friends that were in danger. So, I mean, first person works. Suspense, though, not really my style. And now you've got to make your character fit the bill. So whatever your story, your idea calls for, you've got to make your character fit. And what that means is that you can't randomly insert your character into this plot that will have nothing to do with him. For instance, if this is a war zone, then you can't make your character this, well, not a war zone, that's a bad example. If it's a hospital and stuff, if you want to, and there's somebody dying in there, why would you have this war veteran come in? I mean, it's a good idea for all you writers. You know, it gets your thoughts flowing, but does it really fit in with your overall idea of the story? So now, anti-heroes. Today's society is very gritty, very dark, and people like to think that their heroes are anti-heroes. But anti-heroes are just as good as heroes. And just because they are darker does not make them anti-heroes. What makes anti-heroes anti-heroes is what they do and for what purpose they do it. For instance, if your character kills 5 men, that does not mean that he is an anti-hero. If an anti-hero is a person that kills 5 men because they can, not because they were defending anybody, but just because they like it, they like to experience all these dark emotions and stuff. And so they're hard to define as main characters, though, because to make a main character, you've got to make them relatable. And anti-heroes aren't that relatable in the story form, because you're trying to get inside their head. They're great as minor characters, though, because you can have tons of characters who seem that they're doing bad stuff for bad reasons just because they can. But for a good guy to be an anti-hero and do all this stuff, and you're getting inside his head, it doesn't work except for in the movies. So now, I'd like you all to outline some sort of hero right now. I'll give you 10 minutes until 9:20. And so just think up a hero, write some stuff about them. You'll be using him later in the speech. So yeah.